I did this thing about dehydrating and it didn't do this thing. What did I do wrong? Hi, I'm Darcy from the Purposeful Pantry, and I want to be your dehydrating BFF and share with you practical and safe tips on dehydrating food for your family to stay stocked up just like this for whatever you need. So today, we're going to be talking about the questions that I get a lot from people, and the immediate thing is, what did I do wrong? Almost always, the answer is going to be, you weren't patient enough. So the first question I have is, I left my food in the dehydrator for the amount of time that the manual or the website said it's not dry. What did I do wrong? You weren't patient. Because dehydrating is not based on the actual time. That's only a timer to tell you that the machine has turned off or that time has passed. That doesn't say the food is actually finished. So if you put it in the dehydrator and run it for the time that the manual of your food dehydrator says, or on a website that you see, even with mine, I give a range of time that it might be done, not the exact time it's going to be done, because there's no way to tell you exactly when that's going to be. It will depend on so many factors, like how thick did you cut it? Did you prepare it the way that it's intended to be prepared? Did you blanch it? Did you not? Did you cut it in larger pieces than is recommended? Or did you have something that you just harvested after you watered, so it's got more moisture in it than maybe if you'd harvested it first thing in the morning? Maybe you're using a website to tell you, but your machine is a lower wattage than the machine they tested the recipe on. Or maybe your home is very humid because, like for us, it's raining like crazy and the humidity is in the air, which means that it's going to take longer for the humidity to come out of the food and transfer to the air because there's not enough space for it, if that makes sense. So never, ever, 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 ever go by the time to determine whether or not your food is dry. Go by whether the food is dry. So test it. Does it break easily if it's a slice? Is it have a leathery outside texture to it instead of being sticky? Does it, when you break open, is it dry on the inside? Like a lot of times with things like oranges, when you think it's dry on the outside, it looks really dry, and yeah, I can break it, but if I look inside those cells, there's still some moisture there. It's not dry. And it doesn't matter if the time told you it was done. It is not dry. Dry it some more. So the next thing I have is, I put my food on my machine, I dried it, it's all stuck, I can't get it off. What did I do wrong? You didn't necessarily do something wrong, but likely what it is that you don't have the experience to understand that some foods actually stick and some foods don't, and what are the things that you can do to prevent that in the future. So my number one tip would be, even if you're using the trays on your dehydrator without any kind of barrier whatsoever, you're just using those straight trays, some foods are going to stick. Things that are really sugary are likely going to stick. Things that are very wet and can just kind of settle onto those trays, especially the newer metal ones that have the little waves and all the wires, those are so easy to get stuff stuck in. Those are the kind of things that you'll learn over time need to have some kind of parchment paper or like mesh. I love using mesh on mine. It's food grade mesh that you use on dehydrators. This kind of thing is what I use almost all the time, but you can use parchment paper, you can use silicone sheets, whatever you need to use for you. I use these pretty much 95% of the time when I put something on my machine, because not only does it help to manage food transfer, you put the food on here, it's easier to put onto a tray if you didn't just set it right on the tray to begin with, to pull it off, to pour it into a jar. It just makes things so much easier for me. You can use parchment paper the same way, that I never not use this. Almost never. I shouldn't say I never use it, but almost never do I use the actual tray. But if you only want to use the tray, you don't have enough money to buy liners, you don't want to waste parchment paper, any of those kind of things, the key to dehydrating food on those trays without sticking is to flip that food. Okay? Let's take bananas. Bananas are really sugary. That sugar can stick to things. They can settle into a tray, especially those wire ones. It's really easy. So the thing to do is, as soon as you start feeling the top dry, flip them over. And you may need to flip them over once more during the process because it's a longer drying time than maybe something that only takes 6 hours. If it takes 12, 15 hours, you may want to flip it a second time, or maybe even a third if you've got that kind of time. But flipping them allows them not to settle and stick. Tomatoes also can be one of those things that can stick really easily because the moisture, they can settle into the wire, and they can just be super, super sticky if you don't flip them. But my thing is use the mesh. Now, do I flip when using mesh? It depends on the food, but sometimes, yes, I even flip things on mesh because they can stick to this as well. But the cool thing about this is sometimes with the food, all you have to do is bend the mesh a little bit like this, and that stuff pops right off. When trying to pick it up makes it feel sticky, you can do this and bend it, and it tends to break that connection and will pop off pretty easily. And if not, small spatula or something can help break that as well. So there you go. Now, if you've got something that's stuck and you don't know what to do, try this. Try a spatula or a really thin blade to get up under that food and try to pry it off without flipping it up. Just try to get in between those two surfaces. If you have a space in your freezer, you can put that tray into your freezer. When you freeze it, the food tends to shrink a little bit, and so it will release. Also, if you've had it out and it's still stuck, sometimes put it back into your dehydrator, warm it up, and those sugars kind of expand and they may release as well. So those are other ways that you can get things off. Here's another question. I dried for 12 hours like my manual said. I put it in my jar, put it on the shelf, and it molded. What did I do wrong? This is kind of comparison to the first question about not paying attention to that timer. No, just don't pay attention to the timer. I know many of you have a machine that you have to set the timer in order for it to work. Set it way out there. Don't even pay attention to it, or set it for the 12 hours, check it, and then let it dry more, because it's probably not going to be dry. Maybe it is, depending on the food and your humidity, but don't rely on that timer. Now, here's the thing about doing dehydrated foods. Once you think it's done, you have to check the food. So we're going to take my tomatoes, okay? When you pull it off a tray, not only are you going to look at something and go, did it break easily? Just like that. Did it crack open easily? It's not going to be like a potato chip break, but will it break easily? Now, if it snaps, great. You're going to want to check inside to make sure that the inside is dry, especially if you have something thicker. If it's something like a piece of food like this, you'll want to drop it and hear pink. A plink, not a pink, a plink, instead of a thud. You can, let's take an apple slice, okay? Should have had this laid out before, but I didn't. An apple slice like this. Now, people will say it's leathery, so that's not dry, right? No, actually for apples, that is dry. It's the texture of the outside of it. If it's bendy, like you can bend it a whole bunch and it doesn't snap, it's not dry. If you can break it easily, it's dry. Now, this didn't chip. Like you didn't hear that crisp break of this apple. It's because over time, the little bit of air that's in your jar can take away that crisp break. It's not a big deal. You can vacuum seal the jar. You can use a moisture absorber in your jar if you'd like. That's fine if you want to do that. But that little bit is not a problem. But if you can start bending it and it doesn't break, it's not dry. Put it back in your dehydrator to dry it some more. Okay, next question. The other one that I get a lot is, I conditioned my food and it's still molded. What did I do wrong? Okay, for those of you who are new to dehydrating, conditioning is when you take your final product and you put it into a jar that's got a little space in it, and you shake it up once a day, every day for 5 to 7 days-ish. And you're looking for, do things stick together? Do they stick to the side of the jar? If I turn it over, are they stuck at the top? If you can shake it and it comes off pretty easily, it's fine. There's things called compaction and static that can cause that to happen, and pressure, the compaction. But if you can't shake it off very easily and it's still sticking up there, or you have pieces sticking together on the inside, you need to put it back into your dehydrator and dry it a little longer, because there's probably still moisture left in that food. After you've conditioned it for that 5 to 7 days, if you're not seeing those issues, you can put it away for storage, whether you put it up just like it was, whether you vacuum seal it with a handheld vacuum sealer, or you put a moisture absorber in it, which is one of these little handy packs that absorb moisture. They're called silica packs, desiccant packs, moisture absorbers. They're all the same thing. And if you're putting something away for long-term storage, you can use O2 absorbers, which take the oxygen out of the jar, which helps elongate your storage over a long period of time. But again, they're not necessary. This is all that really is. So after you've conditioned and you put it on the shelf, you're fine. But then maybe after about a week, you notice there's mold in my jar. The thing is, conditioning is a test. It's not foolproof. Sometimes you may have missed the signs of something that still contained quite a bit of moisture in the jar. Maybe it wasn't enough to get everything else to stick, but over time, that moisture then molds because you didn't get everything dry enough in the first place. If it's molded, you have to throw it all out, because the mold here can mean there's actually mold starting here that you can't see yet. You do not want to ingest this food because you don't want to ingest the mold. You would have to throw it all out. Unfortunately, that's what you would need to do. But conditioning 99% of the time is going to catch that before you put it on the shelf. So make sure you condition. Now, if you're finding that you condition something and it's still molded after time, you've got a couple of issues. One, maybe you thought jerky was shelf stable. Maybe that was jerky that you did. And you said, I conditioned it for 5 days, put it on the shelf, it's still molded. If it wasn't cured jerky, the likelihood is that you didn't get the jerky dry enough. It's not shelf stable without being cured. It needs to be stored in the freezer for the best optimal storage that you have. You want to make sure you do that. If it's something else, it just may mean, like I said, that there's something in there that you missed that was still wet enough that it wasn't sticking to things, but it had moisture left in it and continued to mold over time. What that means is that you learned a lesson: dry longer. You can rarely ever over dry anything. Fruit leather, yes. Beef jerky, yes. It can get hard. Like for our family, we actually like crispy fruit leather more than the chewy stuff because it's chunks. It's like chips instead of the chewy things. And some of us have some dental things that we don't like to have that stuff stuck in our teeth. And they make good chips for doing yogurt and stuff. So it could be it's a personal preference about that. And with some fruit is the same way. Some people like fruit that are a little softer than what I've been showing you with my fruit. And that's fine. If you like softer fruit, store it in your refrigerator, because the softer fruit means there may still be moisture enough in it that it will mold on the shelf over time. So it's not an issue of, can I over dry it? For most other food, you can't over dry it, especially if you're putting it up into storage, because it needs to be fully dry to have best food storage on the shelf. Okay, another question I get: I dried everything fine. Did I over dry it? Because when I put it in my soup to make it, I throw it in the soup and let it warm up, and everything in there is still hard and chewy. Did I over dry it? No, in fact, you didn't over dry it. That's the point of dehydrating food. You want it completely dry so that when you store it on a shelf like this, it does not mold or turn rancid, okay? When you add your dehydrated food to soup, it's not an instant thing like you get at the store where you have instant soup in like 5 minutes in the hot, it's ready to go. A lot of times that's either freeze-dried foods or they were fully cooked before they were dried, and so they are going to rehydrate and cook faster in the soup. That makes it more instant. Now, you can still do that with your dehydrated food, cook it all the way, dry it, and then use it. That's fine too, okay? But most people choose to dry from the raw state to keep all the nutrients, to use it however they want, in whatever application they want later. They want that option. So when you put your food into something to rehydrate in order to make a meal from it, you have a few options. You want to rehydrate it first and then add it to a meal to make it go quicker. Or if putting it into something like soup, you want to allow it to rehydrate first, and then it still needs to cook because you didn't cook it fully in the first place. Even if you blanched it, it wasn't fully cooked. Now, again, fully cook it beforehand, use it in a mixed meal in a jar if you want, and that makes it more instant because it will take less time. If you're going hiking and camping and backpacking, those kind of things, you want to do a fully cooked meal first because it will make it much faster to rehydrate and cook on the road. Plus, it will use less fuel in order to keep everything heated enough to cook that food. You don't want to have to cook it on the trail. You just want to reheat it. My biggest tip for you if you're beginning dehydrating is be patient, okay? Because patience is the thing that probably makes most processes go bad, because you're excited to do this thing that you've seen people do and you want to put your food on the shelf and you dry the things like you're told to, and it just doesn't dry and you don't get it, and then you quit, which is what most people, almost always what I see is people quit because they don't understand why they have food molded, or things just don't turn out the way they thought they were supposed to. It's almost always because you're not giving things long enough to dry. Be very patient, let things dry, and you're going to be surprised at how much easier dehydrating can be for you. If you have any other questions about dehydrating, please leave them in the comments below. I'm happy to answer anything, and other people will chime in with their answers as well. And until I see you again next time, nevertheless, she preserved. Remember that, folks. I'll see you next time.